That's enough out of you. A weekly podcast where you'll hear the truth, or at least a closer version of the truth than most of the bullshit that's out there. Here are your hosts, Bill Rader and Sean Kane.
Welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I'm your host, Bill Rader.
And I'm Sean Kane.
And this is a weekly podcast where we talk about all kinds of different things. We talk about sports. We talk about history. We talk about sports history. We talk pop culture and movies, TV, music, all that kind of stuff.
Historical figures like JFK, RFK, MLK.
We've been doing that a lot lately. And this month, really special month, November, we've done all JFK shows, and this one is no exception. Sean, it's I would say an exciting show for us, right? Really highly anticipated. We've been doing a lot of advertising for this show, and hopefully people are getting really excited about it. It's a show we did, an interview we did with author Lisa Pease, and we recorded that a few days ago, and we're going to play for you. We're going to do part one of that interview. And Sean, why don't you? I know you've been in touch with Lisa for quite a while. You've been following her for a while.
Yeah, well, this is kind of like an idol moment for me, Bill, because she's she's been really, like, I've been following her research and her books for a long time, and she's the author of the book A Lie Too Big to Fail: The Real History of the Assassination of Robert F. Kennedy, which I could tell you, Bill, because I read a lot of books on the RFK assassination, and this is by far the best book on the assassination. I mean, she did a lot of research on it, took a long time to write, and it's just a tremendous book. I recommend it to everybody, and hopefully someday we'll get her back on to talk about that one. But she was also recently in the Oliver Stone movie documentary, Destiny Betrayed, and she's also contributed in the book JFK Revisited. She also co-edited the book The Assassinations, which covers all the assassinations of the 60s, Bill, the JFK, MLK, RFK, and Malcolm X.
Yeah.
And she's just been in countless documentaries. She's done countless interviews. You could get her on YouTube. You just put her name in there, Lisa Pease, and a pile of interviews will come up, and I've seen every single one of them. I mean, she's just amazing, and she's from Los Angeles, and just does a great job. Great author and a great researcher.
And how did you connect with her, Sean?
Well, I mean, I first came across one of her interviews, I believe. No, you know what? It was an article she wrote that I seen years ago. This is probably in the 90s. I think that I read an article of hers, and then I started following her YouTube interviews and stuff. And then I just got her books, the assassinations. And then the A Lie Too Big to Fail only came out a few years ago. I think that was, I want to say 2018.
Mm-hmm.
But then I just connected it with her on social media.
Okay.
And then she listened to our podcast, the first one that we did on the JFK presidency, and she loved it. So she reached out to me that she really enjoyed it. And, I asked her, would you like to come on our show? And she was gracious enough to come on.
Yeah. And she couldn't have been more gracious. She was, fantastic guest and spent a lot of time with us, spent about an hour with us. So,
we probably could have, that interview, Bill, probably could have went on all day if we wanted to. There was so much to talk about. It was just great. All the information. It was just incredible.
Yeah. She was great. She really was. And, so we'll play that part one of that interview here. And then you won't have to wait too long for part two. So Friday, normally our shows drop on Fridays. This one is a special one, a Tuesday show, but you'll get part two of our interview on Friday. We'll do part one for you here. Sean, anything else before we cut to the interview with Lisa, part one?
Just that I hope everybody enjoys it, and I just hope that anybody who's not familiar with Lisa's work goes out and buys her books and looks her up on YouTube and reads her articles, because I'm telling you, I've followed this stuff for years, but you know that. And she's one of my favorite researchers, if not my favorite. I mean, she's incredible, the work she's done. And she's just done a lot of work too for Sirhan too, trying to be, to help with his parole and everything. And she's just this incredible researcher and author. So it was just a privilege to have her on.
Yeah, it really was. All right, so let's do it then. We'll play part one, and I hope you enjoy it.
All right, Lisa, how you doing?
I am doing good. How are you doing?
Oh, we're doing great.
Good.
Let's get right into it. We're going to talk to JFK assassination today. Bill, you want to start us off?
Yeah. So first of all, Lisa, thank you so much for doing this. It's really, really appreciated. This is a real treat for us. So kind of, we've done a few episodes and we've really been focused on the JFK assassination. So we're glad that you're joining us to really get us kicked off here. So thank you so much. So just a couple, my first question really is just about how you kind of got into this and knowing that, this kind of getting into this type of a field where, you could be called like a conspiracy theorist, and the mainstream media is going to label you and the people that talk about these types of things as sort of fringe and not really part of what the mainstream media considers to be a usual news and that kind of stuff. Why would you, knowing that, why would you pursue this?
Well, first, I didn't know that when I got started.
I've actually heard some interviews with you that said, when you first started, when you first got into that website and you were getting into arguments left and right and
oh yeah, no, I figured it out pretty quickly that I would be attacked. I don't like bullies. I've never liked bullies. I was always the kid who stood up for others in school. And so, yeah, my first internet search ever was JFK assassination, landed in the alt conspiracy JFK news group, for those of you old enough to remember news groups, because I haven't had them in a long time, I don't think. It was a forum where people were hotly debating the case, and I do mean hotly and debating. And I had read maybe 2 books at that point, and I thought I knew a lot. So I jumped in, and it's like, wow, it looks like CIA did this and blah, blah, blah. And people were just attacking me. You don't know what you're talking about and this or that. But they weren't just attacking me. They were attacking everybody who said that. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, so-and-so said this, and I happen to know that's true. And so I would jump in to defend other people. And that gave me the courage to defend myself. If it had just been me, I might have backed off. But oh my God, when you start picking on other people who are telling the truth, that really gets my goat. I am, it's like, I'll put up with a lot, but I can't stand liars and I can't stand bullies. And I found both in these forums. And so I hung in there for a while until, after about 5 years of arguing with one guy in particular, John McAdams, who was a professor at Marquette University and ran the biggest anti-conspiracy site. And I'm like, what motivates a guy to devote all his free time, because it was literally all his free time, to defending something that's already accepted as like the standard, the government position? And I thought maybe he's paid by intelligence. So I poked around his background and I couldn't find any holes. And he finally gave me the answer because he outed himself, basically. He called himself an official representative of an organization that I happened to have read had been founded entirely with CIA money. So once I saw that, and then I looked into the backgrounds of others, and one of the lone nuts was like from naval intelligence, and another lone nut was part of the FBI. And I'm like, okay, there's a pattern here. These are all like government operatives. And so that also made me more determined, but it also made me see, look, the people who are discussing here, by keeping us all in there fighting and discussing, we're not talking to the outside world.
Right.
And so I realized that suddenly it was much more important to go talk to the outside world. And that's when I kind of broke away and, really focused on writing up what I knew and what I'd been learning.
Yeah.
And anyway.
No, that's great, and you've done a fantastic job. I know I've started reading your book on the Robert Kennedy assassination. Sean's read it several times, and
Yeah, I pretty much read everything you did, Lisa. I'm a huge fan. I mean, every time, every interview you did, I think I've seen on YouTube, every book, every article you read. I mean, you're just one of the best researchers in this field. It's just amazing the work you did.
Well, thank you so much. And I want to commend you guys. Well, I don't go on everybody's show. I get asked to be on more shows than I accept, but I had heard your broadcast on the JFK, who he was, not the assassination, but just who he was. And it was so honest and refreshing and full of actual facts. And so I'm like, who are these guys? They're great.
And the interesting thing about that is the feedback we got. Like, we never mentioned like the assassination that much or who was behind it, but we didn't have to. Because
Right.
after listening to that, you know, a lot of people realized, oh, okay, this is what happened.
Right. Yeah. When you see who he was up against, because JFK was, again, he was somebody who disliked bullies, and he stood up for the little guy countries around the world who the US government previous to him and the Soviet Union had tried to bully. And it was like, you're either with us or you're against us. And that whole mindset. And Kennedy was not like that. He's like, you can be with us, you can be against us, or you can be independent, and that's okay.
Yes.
And
exactly.
that made him beloved around the world because that was fresh and new, and no one had ever said that to them before. You have the right to self-determination.
So that kind of
ties into what you were going to say next, Bill. Go ahead.
It does, yeah. So we've been doing a lot of our last couple episodes. We've been doing a lot of talking about Oswald, and how the evidence doesn't really stack up, and it falls short of what we would call, or gives you a lot of reason to doubt what we've been told. The official story, which as Jesse Ventura said, the official story is created to protect the officials, right?
Right. That's a good line.
Yes.
I haven't heard that. Yeah, no, I mean, here you have Oswald, a supposed communist sympathizer who somehow manages to get through the Marine training undetected as a communist sympathizer, even though he's playing Russian operas and praising Russia in camp, and people are reporting it, and they're all being told, hey, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. Goes to the Soviet Union, has a defector at the height of the Cold War, decides not to defect, decides to come back, and the military gives him a plane ride home.
It's amazing.
It's like,
amazing.
Here's a guy who like goes to the Soviet Union and basically hints that I have special information to share, and knowing that the Soviets had actually planted microphones in the US Embassy when they built it. So he was speaking directly to the Soviets saying, I have some stuff of special, import to share. And he wasn't arrested at the American Embassy as a traitor. I mean, that story is not believable. What is believable is, here's a young guy, gung-ho American, trained to be an intelligence agent, starts at the Atsugi base, which is a super secret. They were doing not only U-2 flights over China there, which wasn't known at the time or reported and highly illegal in terms of international law. And Oswald was the one who brought it to the attention of his superiors because he was tracking the U-2s. So it's like, he's a good guy. And Atsugi, by the way, was also a mind control base. And I'm not sure there isn't a connection there, but I've not delved into that deeply. But Oswald then goes to the Soviet Union. It makes much more sense if he's a fake defector. And in fact, the CIA had sent about 10 people over at the same time as Oswald. 2 of them wooed Marina. She came out with Oswald, but there was another guy, Robert Webster, who tried to woo her first. She was a target of intelligence. We wanted to get her out of that country.
Interesting.
So, it's like they sent guys, she had an uncle in what was then the NKVD, which is the equivalent of the FBI in the Soviets. It wasn't the KGB, it was the domestic intelligence. And, but it was a time when the Soviet was such a closed society that literally knowing what streets look like, knowing what cafes were around where they could maybe make a dead drop. This was actually of vital importance. And so when Oswald comes home and is debriefed by the CIA, even though the CIA denied that for years, John Newman found the evidence that he was debriefed. Oswald also writes what they later called his diary. Well, I read this thing. First of all, it's not a diary. It's like describing Soviet airfields and how many, planes are visible and what it's like in the factories and the working conditions and how much he's getting paid. And he's getting paid an exorbitant amount of money, and it's coming to him from the Red Cross. He didn't work for the Red Cross. So obviously that's a front. And only, the mob doesn't use the Red Cross as a front. The CIA was using the Red Cross as a front.
Wow.
Exactly.
That's so interesting. And we've talked about and we've mentioned Fletcher Prouty and how, what he has said about Oswald and the mafia and the Cubans and the Russians and how it's really all scenery. And it's distracting us, and keeping us from asking the real question, which is why was he killed?
Right.
And, we've given probably a dozen different reasons, was it Vietnam? Is it his foreign policy, his domestic policy? Whatever.
It was his worldview. Which was deeply in conflict with the people running America at the time, the big industrialists, the top industrialists, the people in the CIA at the highest levels. These were people who felt America not only had the right, but the duty to go out and steal resources from other countries that were weaker than us to prop up our way of life. I mean, bottom line, that's what's been going on for decades. And Kennedy was the first to say, this isn't right. We shouldn't be doing this. And we're going to give economic aid, not military aid, to leaders who invest in education and agriculture and want to do right by their citizens. And one of the people he gave aid to was Sukarno in Indonesia, the very same guy that the CIA had tried to overthrow a few years earlier. They literally tried to kill him. They had an assassination plot out against them, which Kennedy found out about. He's like, no wonder, Sukarno, doesn't like us. We tried to kill him. I mean, he was so different. And I didn't realize when I was growing up, John Kennedy never really struck a chord with me because all I heard was the disinformation, Cold Warrior, and, his father stole the election, which also wasn't true, and in bed with the mafia, not true, all kinds of things that were not true. But because of that, it had become embedded in me. So I kind of didn't care who he was as a person. But when I started reading about, the people trying to kill him, it seemed obvious there was more to the story.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started looking into, I was literally the first researcher to go back and look at JFK's record in Indonesia. And the only reason I did that was there was a little company called Freeport Sulphur, not a little company, but at that time, not a huge company, operating out of New Orleans. And Garrison had stumbled upon some records related to this country because one of the executives was evidently working with the CIA to kill Castro, to protect their nickel mining operations in Cuba. And one other researcher had said, and I took it as a challenge, he's like, wow, it's hard to find information on this company. And I'm like, it's a public company. There should be a ton of information on this company. Right. And so I really started digging in, and I found like all the board members, deep connections to the Rockefellers and to the CIA. And
that was basically like a Rockefeller company, right, Lisa?
Exactly. I mean, it was completely Rockefeller controlled. And so that led me then to their interests and investments in the same company in Indonesia in a different branch. And it turned out that in the 1920s, I think it was, a Dutch, explorer had found gold in a mountain in Indonesia, and he'd found copper and gold. He completely underreported the amount of gold so that there wouldn't be a big gold rush over there. But they did emphasize the copper, which was kind of on top of the gold anyway. And as they mined the mountain, it's now a big pit. What used to be a beautiful mountain is now a big pit in Indonesia. But it's become one of the world's richest gold mines in the world. And Allen Dulles knew about that, but Kennedy didn't.
Lisa, didn't they say you can mine the gold there for like 200 years?
Oh, I don't know if that's true, but if you read it, I believe you because you've been pretty honest on the other stuff. I haven't personally read that, but it wouldn't surprise me. It's a very rich vein.
And of course, Dulles knew about that.
And Dulles knew about it, didn't tell Kennedy. And that's one of the reasons the CIA wanted to overthrow Sukarno. Dulles was working. I mean, Dulles had got his whole career started because of the Rockefellers. His brother was a lawyer, a partner with the Rockefeller law firm. And,
wasn't he married into the family too? His
That
brother?
again, I don't remember. I don't know Clover's history there, but um, it's a symbiotic relationship because the Rockefellers had the capacity to fund CIA operations at a time when the government was still kind of getting its legs under it. That's one of the reasons they used Howard Hughes too, because Howard Hughes had a ton of money, and the CIA is always looking for off the books money to run their off the books operations.
Right.
You know, the whole concept of plausible deniability, right?
And of course, Robert Mayhew ties into Howard Hughes.
Yes, yes. Mayhew was the guy, he went to Howard Hughes early on, and Howard Hughes had said, look, I want to get in bed with the CIA because, you know, I have the money, they need the operations. I approve of what they're doing around the world. I want to help, and they need to help me get my airline because he was trying to buy TWA at that time. So that's kind of how that relationship took off. Now, what happened, of course, is Howard Hughes became a little crazier. I'm not sure the CIA didn't have something to do with that, by the way, because it was their doctor, you know, kind of treating him. So, you know, it's like if you have access to billions of dollars that aren't going away anytime soon, and you got this somewhat crazy guy under your control, you can just imagine what gets to happen in that scenario. And so the CIA then tapped Mayhew to run the Castro plots while he was working for Hughes. And he didn't tell Hughes at first, which shows you Mayhew's real loyalties. His loyalty was to the CIA more than Hughes. And when Hughes found out, he was only mad that he hadn't been told, because he's like, hey, I approve. You know, you go spend all the time you want. I'm just mad that you didn't tell me up front. So anyway, yeah, Mayhew, then the CIA turns to Mayhew when they want to get in bed with the mafia to kill Castro. And Mayhew introduces them to Johnny Roselli, one of the West Coast mafia leaders who happened to know Sam Giancana in Chicago and Sam Trafficante. And, you know, the three of them are trying to work on plans. But I think it was when one of the CIA guys, and it might have even been David Phillips, it's been a while now, but David Phillips had a relationship with this Freeport Sulfur Company, and he had a relationship with the Castro plots. And at one point, they met at the Moa Bay Mining Company, which appears to have a deep relationship with the CIA. And David Phillips evidently had an office in the Moa Bay Mining Company. And either Mayhew or I think it was Jim O'Connell who took over from Mayhew to, you know, run that particular plot. But one of the CIA guys met the mob and basically tried to say we're business people with the Freeport Sulfur Company. And I just say that to show how deeply embedded the business world and the CIA world is. And it's that nexus that was trying to kill Castro without either Kennedy's knowledge at that point. You know, Bobby Kennedy found out that the CIA was trying to kill Castro when Mayhew got caught red-handed bugging Sam Giancana's mistress.
Yeah.
And was told you can't really pursue too much of a suit against him because that opens up this huge can of worms that leads to the fact that we were trying to kill Castro. And in their own documents, the CIA made clear that they only told the Kennedys about the plots that had ended and not about the plots that were ongoing at that time. They never had his permission. And in fact, Kennedy, when he found out they'd been trying to kill Castro, then he got more sensitive to that. And at one point, the CIA tried to poison a shipment of sugar going out of Cuba to Russia. And Kennedy, you know, knew the CIA was going to run this operation because somebody from the inside tipped him off. So Kennedy had his loyalists run in and switch out the sugar so that the poisoned sugar did not. So, I mean, Kennedy's literally running operations against his own CIA. That was reported in the New York Times in, I think, 1966. They did one really good series. It was like a 3 or 4 part series on the CIA being kind of out of control. And it was the only time the New York Times has ever been that bold on that agency.
And Lisa, that's something that drives me crazy because there's people out there that want to say that both Kennedys knew about those plots.
Yeah.
And it's just total disinformation.
It comes from one person. And I found this because every time I would read a book and I would see this, I'm like, who said that?
Was that Helms?
That didn't make sense. Well, it was Sam Halpern. Sam Halpern had worked directly with Richard Helms.
Right.
And Sam Halpern claimed he got that information from Richard Bissell. Well, when the church committee questioned Bissell under oath, he denied that. Now, the spin on that is, well, of course the CIA denied it. They were covering for President Kennedy. And I'm like, so they're going to attack him in public and they're going to cover for him in private?
But
that
the thing
doesn't
is,
make sense.
no, it doesn't make
lie
sense.
about people usually, in, how do I want to say it? You usually tell your lie in public and tell the truth in private. Most people don't tell the truth in public and lie in private. That makes no sense.
Those plots originated under Eisenhower. They didn't even originate under Kennedy.
They did. And yeah.
Yeah, it's just really disinformation.
And I think what happened too is Bill Harvey got very involved with these plots. In fact, the Roselli relationship was handed to Bill Harvey. And in the missile crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis, just when things were kind of at the boiling point, Bobby Kennedy learned that Bill Harvey had sent 10 commando teams into Cuba, landing in Cuba. He would ballistic.
He wanted to fire him, right?
Harvey come see him, and there was a lot of shouting, and Harvey put his gun on the table and spun it around, and
wow.
And Bobby did not back down. See, this is the other thing. The Kennedys had balls. I mean, they just had courage like no one.
Yeah. And of course, they wanted to fire Harvey, right? And then didn't Richard Helms protect them by sending him to Rome?
Right, where he got to go talk to his, the mafia there and Sicilians, and probably bring a few back to Dealey Plaza.
Unbelievable.
And that's one of the things the JFK research community is up in arms about. That to this date, the CIA has never released Bill Harvey's travel records for November. And, through some of the other agents, we've learned that Harvey told people he was in Dallas on November 22nd,
right?
Which would actually make sense. But we can't prove it because the CIA won't give us the records.
Wasn't there a witness, somebody that worked for Harvey, that said he's seen him in Dallas?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's in, I don't know, it's in a documentary somewhere or some YouTube. I saw the guy talk about it. I forget who has that. Maybe Jeff Morley tracked that down. But so we have significant questions and likely suspects that we've never been allowed to pursue. And every time, the CIA says it's going to release all the records, they find a reason not to. And they just keep delaying and delaying. And let me tell you, if LBJ had killed Kennedy, we would have known it by now. If the mob had killed Kennedy, we would have known it by now.
Right.
The people are dead. Who cares? But if an agency of the U.S. government killed Kennedy, that would be the reason the records are still
Exactly.
So honestly, it's like the longer time goes on, that's just more proof that the CIA killed Kennedy. Literally, no one else has the power to keep that information that secret for that long. And let me address that point too, because I hate it when people are like, oh, somebody would have talked. Well, first of all, thousands of people have talked.
Yeah,
it's just not being reported. And why hasn't it been reported? Well, that's because the CIA has had a deep hold on the American media since inception. In fact, the CIA formed out of the OSS, and the OSS was formed specifically as a propaganda operation to combat Nazi propaganda. Roosevelt was really shocked at how quickly Hitler came to power and the power that he had over the masses. He's like, how does he do that? How do we counter that? We need a propaganda, organization of our own. And then Wild Bill, what's his name? I forget the last name because I've got Bill Harvey on the mind, but the Wild Bill Donovan, banker, he decides to lead the propaganda operation, and it quickly becomes a covert operation organization. And the whole thing kind of took off and grew beyond anybody's control because they were self-funding. These were privateers, and you could say some of them had America's best interest at heart, but a lot of them didn't. Allen Dulles was making deals with Nazis and sabotaging FDR's direct orders. I mean, and this was even before he was head of the CIA.
Right. And Dulles was involved with Operation Paperclip, correct?
Yes. He brought over Reinhard Gehlen, the head of the Nazi Secret Service, essentially went to a ball game with him in New York City.
Unbelievable.
My best buddy, Nazi collaborator, they just scary, terrible people. And By the way, I don't want to say that everyone in the CIA is bad, because I don't believe that. And there
No.
are people that say destroy the CIA, and I'm not in favor of that. But I am in favor of what Kennedy was trying to do, was move all the paramilitary operations out of CIA and into his newly created Defense Intelligence Agency, where it would be in a strict military command chain of control. None of these off the books covert operations. I mean, basically, America operates terrorist cells under the guise of the CIA. That's really what they are. They just don't terrorize America. They terrorize other countries. So
Right.
most of the time they don't. That's also a lie, that the CIA never operates domestically. That's what the Church Committee and the Pike Committee and the Rockefeller Commission were all
Right.
about. The CIA was deeply involved in American politics and doing dastardly deeds here at home. And that's why those investigations were launched. And the fact that not one person went to jail for those illegal operations should tell you who has the upper hand in this country to this day.
Exactly. And Lisa, one last question on Freeport Sulphur, which is going to tie into the next thing I want to discuss. Wasn't Clay Shaw connected to Freeport Sulphur?
Yeah, there was I think he was tied to Dick White, who was evidently a vice president at Freeport Sulphur, and Clay Shaw evidently was part of the Castro plots, which kind of makes sense, because I think I remember seeing ZR Beach or something in Clay Shaw's CIA file. I'd have to go back and look, but the ZR codes were the, how do I want to say, the coup plots. A lot of them were. ZR Rifle was ZR the plot to kill Castro. There was another ZR attached to Indonesia. And so what was ZR Beach? Can't say, but if Clay Shaw was involved, that strongly suggests he was literally part of the coup team. And Clay Shaw was the perfect place for cover, because he was an import-export agent. So if you needed to move goods back and forth. In fact, there's an excellent book, which I highly recommend you both read at some point, if you can even find it, because it's kind of been disappeared, but it was called Thy Will Be Done. And it's the history of oil in the age of Rockefeller, or something like that, or the history of the Rockefellers in the age of oil. I forget the exact name, but in that book, which is a comprehensive history of both the CIA, the Rockefellers, and a Christian institute used to pacify people in foreign countries so they would accept more of the dictators, and all your suffering comes from God, and this is a good thing, and that makes you a better Christian to suffer, and as opposed to stand up and fight for your rights.
Right.
So the perversion, unfortunately, of religion in that regard. But in that book, he talks about how a coffee company in New Orleans was shipping guns to Latin America to foment revolution against democratic leaders to support, dictators. And where did Oswald work? The Riley Coffee Company. And he used to hang out in the garage. It's like, what's he doing there? Maybe packing guns to ship down, to foreign countries. It's all kind of connected.
All right. So that was part one of the Lisa Pease interview, and part two will be out on Friday. Sean, that was just
incredible, buddy. It was just amazing. It really was. I mean, she's such a good author and researcher, and her knowledge of the events of the 60s and everything on the Kennedys and CIA operations. I mean, and she's just incredible. It was a great interview.
Yeah. And then, of course, part two, like I said, part two coming up on Friday. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you are you're following our podcast and subscribed on YouTube and however you get the podcast. If you use any of the podcast apps or YouTube or however you do it,
write us a review and send an email. Any questions? We'll be happy to answer it.
Absolutely. Email your questions to our email, which is that'senoughoutofoushow@gmail.com, and write us a review, give us a rating, give us a good rating if you could. And we hope you enjoyed it, and come on back for part two. So Sean, good job. Thanks.
All right, buddy. Good night, everybody.
All right. That's enough out of you.